But to start out, the acceleration of the new Reich. This is, I just, you know, Teddy, what's his last name? Teddy Wilson over at Radical Reports. Radical Reports is just a great Substack newsletter. And he published one last week that had, I think it was Friday, that had just a whole series of links in it to, you know, things that, you know, what's going on right now. And so I went through those links and a few others and came up with, I think, what's a pretty good overview of what's going on in America right now. Keep in mind, most all of this, there are two exceptions, but outside of them, all the rest of this is stuff that has just happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's getting more and more brazen. I mean, this past weekend, there was a group of Nazis who marched through downtown Nashville, complete with swastikas, giant swastika flags, and racist chants. The media treated it like it was just another day. This stuff is getting normalized. Republicans who run Texas are in open defiance of the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal government over the border. That's the most significant challenge to federal authority since 1832 and the nullification crisis. And indeed, it's stirring up new pro-Civil War rhetoric among the racist base of the GOP. Andrew Womack, who's a televangelist and a big Republican supporter who called COVID a hoax hyped by liberals as an opportunity to come against Trump, recently on his podcast, Truth and Liberty, he said, quote, "I've actually had people say that if Trump was to be elected, if we got a conservative Congress, that they fear we would have another civil war. And you know what? I don't want a civil war. I don't know anybody that does, but would it be worth it to turn this nation back? I believe it would be worth it." Right. You know, I was in the middle of a civil war in Uganda in 1980. And in fact, one of my colleagues was shot dead. Her name was Anne. She was an Irish Red Cross worker. I just don't think anybody calling for a civil war has actually ever been in one. Because once you've seen what a civil war is like, you don't want them. Anyhow, Nikki Haley has been swatted twice. She's been physically attacked on stage. She's now being stalked at campaign events by Putin-loving Trump supporters who are outraged that she's calling for more military support for Ukraine. Jacob Ware, the author of Guns, God, and Sedition, told the CBC, quote, "I think intent to commit violence is high across the political spectrum, but especially on the far right." And he talks about our gun laws, you know, facilitating that. Just days after Maine Secretary of State Shayna Bellows ruled that Trump had committed sedition and couldn't be on the state ballot, she was swatted. Judges Tanya Chutkan and Arthur Engoron have been targeted by fascist Trump followers. A Trump devotee armed with a hand at Pelosi's home and tried to beat her husband Paul to death. On the campaign trail, Trump regularly refers to the incident as if it was some sort of victory for him, encouraging his supporters to do the same again. Another apparent Trump follower just last month murdered and decapitated his own father because he was a federal employee and therefore part of the deep state that Trump said we got to destroy. When the Washington Post looked into this problem of, the Public Research Religion Research Institute, PRRI, found that fully 23% of Americans agree with the statement, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. And the Washington Post looked into it and found that people running for Congress had to increase their spending on security by over 500% between the time Trump lost in 2020 and last November's midterms. The Brennan Center for Justice questioned 1,700 state and local elected officials in all 50 states and found that fully 40% have been either threatened or physically attacked in the 3 years since Trump lost. 90% said that they have been harassed, intimidated, or stalked. 1 in 10 state legislators report that a person with a weapon had tried to intimidate them on one or more occasions. 1 in 5 state officials and almost half of local officials say that because of these threats, they're unwilling to deal with controversial issues like abortion, immigration, or gun control. I mean, it just goes on and on. Last year, Republican anti-abortion extremist Philip Bunyo loaded his car with a hatchet, flares, matches, and bottles and cans filled with gasoline, and then drove to a reproductive care center, Affirmative Care Solutions, rammed his car into the front entrance, told police when he gets out of jail he's going to finish the job. He says he's part of this rescue group with a bunch of guys who have signed the justifiable homicide statement saying if you kill abortion doctors, that's all good. Last week, an openly Nazi group marched in front of the home of Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. In Idaho, 31 hateful white supremacists had the case against them dismissed because FBI agents and local prosecutors had accidentally bungled the evidence and interrogations. Last week, a Tennessee man was arrested for trying to participate in a plot with 2 Texas men to visit the southern border and murder Border Patrol agents, along with any immigrants who happened to be standing around. One of them was in possession of 6 semi-automatic firearms, 20 magazines, and around 1,800 rounds of ammunition. The border has been flooded with immigrants ever since Moscow Mike called a press conference and said, the U.S. border is wide open. Johnson, of course, the Speaker of the House, has openly promoted the Great Replacement theory. He said, here's what he said. This is, quote, if you're scratching your head, you've seen the video, you've seen droves of people, 2.4 million people coming over the border illegally, the president allowing it, the Democrats in charge of Congress are allowing it. The deal is they're going to turn them into voters. Right. That's not the deal, as you well know, I'm sure. But, you know, the Great Replacement theory, this was Hitler's theory about Jews. You know, they're out reproducing us. Recently, a convoy of armed white supremacists calling themselves God's Army made their way to the southern border, echoing Trump and Hitler's rhetoric that dark-skinned immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. The FBI had to evacuate the Border Patrol Processing Center because of threats from right-wingers. A few days later, Paul Fay Sr., identified as a malicious sniper, was arrested for planning to murder Border Patrol agents. He thought that if he could kill a few, that would start other white people going out and killing other federal employees. This was, you know, basically the premise of Turner Diaries, the novel that motivated and inspired Tim McVeigh. Fay said that it was the Great Replacement theory, you know, quoted by Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, that caused him to want to go murder these people. I mean, America's Voice is a news, you know, agency, and they said America's Voice has identified 120 members of Congress who amplified the replacement and invasion conspiracy in their official capacity just this last year. We've identified over 1,040 times top Republican candidates, officials, or outfits pushed the bigoted fiction in just the last year. We also identified this disturbing practice more than 700 times in 2022. In 2023, the House Republican majority brought 13 witnesses to congressional hearings to promote the Great Replacement theory, including one guy who'd been arrested on January 6th. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I'm not even halfway through the article of all this lengthy list of everything that has happened literally just in the last couple of weeks. This is called acceleration. These people are quite excited. They're quite giddy about the possibility that they could bring down the American government, they could end our pluralistic society, and they could replace our leadership with a fascist, with a strongman. Because these are frightened little people. These are people who, they're afraid of gay people, they're afraid of trans people, they're afraid of black people, they're afraid of Hispanic people, they're afraid of Asian people, they're afraid of Jews, they're afraid of Muslims. They're living in terror. And as we pointed out yesterday, I mean, Sinclair Broadcasting does surveys to find out what people are afraid of so they can feed them more of it. Because fear drives people to the right. Cowards. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a aggrieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Donner's Tag. It's Thursday. What if the person the majority of Americans voted for actually became president? We'll talk about that in a minute. By the way, just a couple of news things real quickly. The CIA is warning Israel that Iran is going to attack them within the next 48 hours. And today, President Biden is going to be speaking with Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. We'll see if he pulls back those bombs that we committed to them on the day that the World Central Kitchen people got murdered. So anyhow, back. Oh, and also Twitter is putting, or X is putting those little blue checks back on media people. It's very strange. Are Republicans starting to realize that Trump and Maga Republicans are dancing to Putin's tune? We'll get into that in just a moment. And might the FCC bring back net neutrality? What is net neutrality anyway? We'll talk about that in a few minutes also. At the top of the second hour of our program today, Phil Ittner is going to drop by with an update on what's going on in Ukraine. He is live in Kyiv right now. Also, Alabama Republicans are trying to criminalize librarians simply for doing their jobs. I'll tell you about that. And Geeky Science. Can a vegan diet help diabetics? An amazing new study. In the third hour of our program, might Judge Merchan send Trump to jail now? Interesting events overnight. I'll tell you about that in the third hour. Also, has anyone noticed that Donald Trump's bond was rejected by New York State? Now, this is probably just a technical glitch, but it's interesting. I'll tell you about that in the third hour. And our Hunter at a Farmer's World alert, put a notepad by your bed for ideas. It's an interesting concept. I'll share all that with you as we go through the program. But to start out, very interesting stuff, going on in the voting realm right now. Maine took a huge step yesterday. The Maine legislature yesterday passed a provision or a law, basically saying that when other states that represent 270 electoral college votes, excuse me, let me rephrase that they're joining the other states that right now is at 209, and they want to get it up to 270. When the majority of the country votes for somebody, then these states representing right now 209 electoral votes, but it'll become operational when they hit 270, that these states will give their electoral votes to whoever won the majority vote in the United States. In other words, back when, in 2000, for example, George W. Bush lost that election by 500,000 votes, but he ended up in the White House because of the Electoral College. Well, under this provision, and similarly in 2016, Donald Trump lost the popular vote, the national vote, by 3 million votes. He lost the election by 3 million votes, and yet he was also in the White House. And, I mean, in fact, the last time a Republican was actually elected with the majority of Americans say, yes, we want this person for president, was 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush. That was the last time a Republican was actually elected president. Can you imagine how different America would be if Bush and Trump had not served? We wouldn't have had the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We wouldn't have a right-wing Supreme Court right now. Abortion would still be, controlled by Roe v. Wade. In other words, largely legal until viability with some restrictions. The nation would not be $32 trillion, $34 trillion in debt. We never would have had the Bush tax cuts, and we never would have had the Trump tax cuts. You wouldn't have exploding billionaires, that is to say the number of billionaires exploding and the wealth of billionaires exploding, and because of those massive tax cuts by George W. Bush and Donald Trump. I mean, America would just be a very different place. All the states, the Supreme Court would not have ruled that you can't expand Obamacare via Medicaid to all the states, so everybody in America would have health care right now. If we had just put the people in the White House that the majority of Americans voted for. Well, this interstate compact is the way of making that happen. And Maine signed on yesterday, and it looks like Michigan is going to sign on very quickly. The legislation is moving through their legislature. That will take us to 225 states. And now we're kind of hitting the wall because, the states that we need now have Republicans controlling either one branch of their legislature or their governor's mansion. And as a result, they're not going to join the interstate compact because Republicans hate this. In fact, Trump's whole strategy to win in 2024 is based on not winning the popular vote. He's expecting to lose it by millions and millions of votes, but by winning the Electoral College in a handful of states, 5, 6, 7 states. And, and thus he's getting all these billionaires to pledge all this dark money. I mean, this election this year, it's going to be very interesting. We're going to see the Democratic Party, which is doing really great fundraising. You're going to see the Democratic Party running actual ads and running things through the Federal Election Commission, being honest and transparent. And you're going to see the Republican Party doing very, very little. But you're going to see the consequences of mind-boggling billions of dollars in dark money that is unaccountable. You don't know where it came from. Some of it may well have come from foreign governments. Citizens United legalized that. As John Paul Stevens pointed out in his dissent, he said this decision would have legalized Tokyo Rose, in fact. So you're going to see, we're just going to see the country being swamped with dark money. It's going to be a real test of our democracy. But anyhow, we need to fix the Electoral College, or we need to essentially get rid of it. And the way to do this is through this nationalpopularvote.com. You can find it. And the reason I'm highlighting this is twofold. Number one, Maine just did it. Michigan's about to do it. So it's kind of in the news. It's a newsworthy moment. But the second reason, and I think this is a very important one, is that we really have a possibility of pulling this thing off. It's entirely possible that because abortion is going to be on the ballot in so many of these red states, I mean, we just saw this in Florida this week, right? That the state Supreme Court said, yes, you can have abortion on the ballot, that you're going to have huge turnout that might flip the state blue. I mean, you're still going to have DeSantis as governor, I believe, for another 2 years, but that's not the case in every red state across the country, and there's a very real possibility the Democrats are going to pick up a couple of more states. And if they do and they can get them into the interstate compact, hey, good news. Especially Texas. Texas would be huge, although I'm not sure if Greg Abbott is up for re-election or not. Texas is going to be, it's going to be tough to dislodge the Republicans there because they've done such a good job of suppressing the vote and purging the voter rolls. The same thing going on in Georgia. We're expecting at least 1 million people to be purged from the Georgia voting rolls this year. And they just passed legislation making it even easier to purge people from the voting roll. But in any case, check out the list over at nationalpopularvote.com. It's fascinating, and I think that this is something that we should be planning for. We need to get ready for it. So that's my rant today over at HartmannReport.com. Are Republicans starting to realize that Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are dancing to Putin's tune? Sounds like it. The House Foreign Affairs Committee, the chairman is a Republican from Texas by the name of Michael McCaul. Not Michael McFaul. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia who shows up on MSNBC all the time. Michael McCaul is a conservative Republican from Texas. He describes himself as a Reagan Republican. And Reagan was no fan of the Soviet Union, as you'll recall. So this is what the Puck News Washington correspondent reported, that Well, actually, I'll skip over that. McCall said, I think Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States, unfortunately, and it's infected a good chunk of my party's base. He's specifically talking about Republicans who don't want to send more aid to Ukraine, but he's more generally talking about other issues as well. He says, unlike 1939, we want to provide deterrence so that we don't have to send anyone over there, because the next thing the Russians will do is attack Moldova, Georgia, and then part of the Baltics, or at least provoke a lot. So I think it's just preventative. And this is like the most rational argument for Ukraine aid, is that if you stop Russia and Ukraine, we're not going to have to fight a war with Russia. But if you don't stop Russia and Ukraine, Putin and his generals have already made it very clear that Moldova and Poland are next. And possibly the Baltic states, particularly Latvia, Lithuania, well, all three of them, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the three Baltic states. So, I suppose you could say Finland is too, but in any case, that's what's going on. And he goes on to say, there's a new wing of isolationism, and it takes you again back to the 1930s. That was not helpful. But we had been involved earlier and provided that. Had we been involved earlier, he's talking about World War II. He says, I understand. He says he understands the pacifism in the Republican Party in the late 1930s, early 1940s, because World War I had been such a bloody war. But then he goes on to say, Americans were like, we don't want to have to go over there and save Europe again. But had we been involved earlier and provided that deterrence, we could have saved a lot of blood and treasure. Spot on. I mean, this is, he goes on to say, I just see so many parallels between then and what's happening right now. And if we fail in this aid package and Putin does take Ukraine, and it won't take him very long, then where will the United States be? Yeah, I'm telling you, this is one of the major issues of our time. And Donald Trump, because he is beholden to Vladimir Putin. I mean, his little enterprise, his little social media enterprise, according to some news reports, has been bailed out or kept alive on life support by Russian American who has ties to one of the big cheeses in Russian intelligence. I mean, how it's like Trump is constantly, everything that Trump does, it seems these days, either has money from Saudi Arabia or money from Russia attached to it. How much longer can we tolerate that sort of thing? I mean, this is just crazy. CRAZY in a big way. So, might the FCC bring back net neutrality? What is net neutrality, after all? It's been a couple of years since we've had this debate. It was 2015, I think? No, it was, I'll have to look it up. Whatever year Trump did away with net neutrality. I think maybe it was 2017. But anyhow, we'll be right back with that story. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
17 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this. And welcome back. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good morning, Mr. Hartmann, my good friend. One quick thing before I ask the question. You said 1988 was the last time that the Republicans won the presidential vote by popular vote?
Correct.
Well, I hate to tell you, but in 2004, George Bush got $62 million and John Kerry.
Oh, you're right,
got
on his reelection.
million.
But he never would have stood for reelection if he hadn't been put into office by the Electoral College in 2000.
Yes.
So, well, technically you're right, or technically I'm right, or technically I'm wrong, or whatever. But yeah, I get it.
Okay. Well, 7 or 8 months ago, you told me on the air, you said that if Joe Biden should happen to lose, probably the main reason will be because of the border. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the truest things you've ever said on the air, and I agree with you 1,000%. On MSNBC last week, I think it was on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, it said 72% of the American people don't agree with the Biden policy on the wall. So my question to you is this, real simple. I know that Biden undid 15 or 16 executive actions within the first few weeks, which has caused this problem. But why doesn't some of Biden's advisors say, you know, Joe, you got to get off your butt. You got to do something bold and courageous, even though the House was thwarted by Trump by saying don't vote. You can still do something, and it would show the American people that, you know, this guy is serious
about the southern border.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he went down there. He has already done a number of things, Mark. He expanded the number within the boundaries of what he could do based on Congress, but he expanded the number of judges. He changed the policy around, catch and release, as it were, or what? No, that's a Republican phrase. He has made several changes, and he went down to the border and trumpeted them. It's just that the media never picks this stuff up. I think he's done pretty much everything he can, and that's the problem. I mean, you know, the reality is that the Senate, James Langford, you know, the Republican from Oklahoma.
Yes, from Oklahoma.
Put together, you know, a border control bill, as it were, that hires thousands of new agents, that hires thousands of new judges, so that the waiting time can go from 6 years right now down to 6 months to determine asylum applications, and it will pass the House of Representatives. But Mike Johnson was told by Donald Trump that he wants to be able to continue to whine and complain about the southern border, and therefore don't pass this legislation because it'll solve the problem. I mean, you know, this problem is not Joe Biden's problem. This is a problem that the Republicans have created and resisted any effort to fix. I mean, George W. Bush had a comprehensive immigration reform program. And who killed it? It wasn't the Democrats. It was the Republicans who killed it. They want this crisis. They want this problem.
And I remember in 2013, Boehner had a chance to pass, and he wouldn't bring it up.
Again, yes,
but
absolutely.
Here's one other quick question I do want to ask you. I learned something that on Lawrence O'Donnell, it said that Obama had a nickname called Deporter in Chief because he deported more illegal immigrants than any president.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how Obama got away with that.
He was just following the law, as far as I know. Mark, thank you for the call. 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. 1/4 of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. So the FCC is going to vote on April 25th. Which is, what, about 3 weeks from now. They're going to vote on whether to restore net neutrality. What is net neutrality? Well, here's how it used to work before Trump did away with it. If you were an internet service provider, if you were the company that brings the internet into people's homes, you were classified as what's called a common carrier. A common carrier, the phone company is a common carrier. There are certain expectations we have when we use the telephone. If you call somebody, you expect that nobody can listen in on your conversation without a warrant, right? That's just a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's how it used to be on the internet. Your internet service provider, the company bringing the internet into your home, could not listen in on your conversations. Secondly, they can't charge you a different price or offer the service to you, a different quality of service based on who you're talking to. Again, on your telephone, they don't charge you, $1 a minute when you're talking to grandma and $5 a minute when you're talking to your boss, for business. It's not how it works because nobody's listening. There's no, it's all the same. Well, the internet service providers, the companies, wanted to be able to charge people extra to go to some sites or extra to have different, or speed up some sites and slow down other sites in order to benefit themselves, basically. And this was illegal. So what Trump did is he blew up net neutrality. He did away with the common carrier status of these internet service providers. And now your internet service provider, the company that brings your internet into your home, or your phone company, if that's who it is, or if you're using the internet on your phone, can literally watch and read and record everything you do, your own personal emails, every site you visit, every comment you post, literally everything you do. And they can sell that information to anybody they want. They can slow down websites that they don't like. They can speed up websites that they do like. This is wrong. I mean, Trump did this because he was being spiffed by the telecom industry. And so now we've got an honest broker back at the head of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel. And she says the pandemic made clear that broadband is an essential service that every one of us, no matter who we are or where we live, needs to have a fair shot at success in the digital age. And so that means that we have to have broadband access that is fast, open, and fair. And, first 3 years of Biden's administration, he's not been able to do this because the FCC chair position was being blocked by the Senate. Well, she finally got appointed, and she's at the head of the FCC, and she's doing exactly what the Republicans were afraid she would do. This is going to reduce the profitability slightly of the internet service companies that are bringing the stuff into your house, the internet into your house, but it's going to dramatically increase your privacy rights. And if you start a small business and you don't want to get stomped by some larger business that can afford to pay your ISP not to give you a high-speed access, then it's going to help small businesses too. This is a good thing. This is a really good thing. And so, good on the FCC and the new chair. Well, we'll see. It's going to be 2.5 weeks, and there's vigorous opposition to this. Big money at stake here. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So that's my summary for the day. What's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle, but moderated by international conventions of behavior, seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. So back in 2012, a group of scientists in the Bay Area started putting up carbon dioxide sensors to see how much CO2 was in the air. And what they have, and this is an area, part of the country, where 1 in 20 cars now are electric vehicles. So about 5% of all vehicles are electric vehicles. And what they've seen now is, over the last 5 years, a 1.8% decrease in carbon dioxide emissions. Success. It's working. And meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene just came out and said that if Mike Johnson allows any kind of legislation that might provide help to Ukraine against Russia onto the floor of the House, she, on Vladimir Putin's behalf, she is going to demand that Mike Johnson lose his job, that he get kicked out as House Speaker. Because, you know, she loves Putin. It's just, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Vladimir Putin sitting in a tree, right? Anyhow, 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. What's on your mind? Russ in Hickory Hill, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. You know, I know it's early yet and Poland's stupid, but I watched Joe Scarborough the last couple mornings, and it seems like Trump's starting to lose his steam. What was it, 60-35 with one woman, 63-35? But, I mean, like, he's up 1 in Georgia, 2 in North Carolina. The best poll was, and they call us a liar, 48-38 in Pennsylvania. He's down. But it seems like he's hit his peak since, what was it, Modern Common or some poll? I never heard of him.
Yeah.
Biden was 49-30-43.
Right, and they're saying that poll is an outlier. But I think that this fall is going to be an absolute blowout. You know, I mean, we have not yet begun to see, or we've only seen the smallest sample of the advertising that the Biden administration is going to be doing, or the Biden campaign is going to be doing, you know, as we go into this election. Like, you know, like I keep saying, you know, the election has not yet really started. It doesn't start until September. Yeah. And, you know, it's just going to be, I think it's going to be a blowout. And I think that we're going to take on, I think we're going to flip a couple of states, too. But we'll see.
Well, you know what I didn't know about? Raphael Warnock invested in? I didn't know we had money. We are big time in the Asian vote that won them. And you know what? They say by 2030, the Asian vote's going to top the Hispanic vote because, let's fix it, 200,000 Chinese leave. They ain't going to miss them. They say the Asian vote is 78-22 against Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
They say
but Asians are a much smaller percentage of the population than Hispanics. There's more Hispanics than there are black people in the country right now.
Yeah, but by 2030 or something, they say the Asians are going to be just crawling up them.
Yeah, I'm not buying that. But I think the Asian vote is consequential. Russ, thanks a lot for the call. Al in Bliss, New York. Hey, Al, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good.
Hey, I just want to say this, and I think that the Democrats should just pound this message over and over again. The Trump administration was warned by their very own trade advisor, Peter Navarro, that a pandemic would hit the U.S., costing our economy trillions of dollars and thousands to well over 1 million lives. They also failed to send the CDC and the infectious disease arm of the military to Wuhan, China, as well as the failure to shut down travel. Tom, why are the Democrats not pounding on this message?
Right.
We wouldn't have had a shutdown. People wouldn't have been quarantined. We wouldn't have had to wear masks. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing the word right. But I'm just so angry about this. They failed. They dropped the ball, just like the Bush administration failed to protect us from the worst attack on American soil.
Yeah, I don't think they dropped the ball in that they could have stopped COVID, because that jumped species.
Well, yes, they could have. If they had sent the CDC and the military down there where the lab was, they would have been able to contain the virus right there, right where the Chinese
were covering that up. I mean, I think it would have been a real challenge. But where Trump did fail, I mean, he started out on March 12th, I believe it was, or 13th, something like that. He shut the country down, essentially, as did every other country in the world. The other countries of the world stayed shut down until the fall, until well into the fall, or until the vaccine became available. Trump didn't. He opened the country back up on April 8th. And that was because on April 8th, there was that New York Times headline saying that it was mostly black people dying from COVID. And had he not opened the country back up,
he could have avoided 500,000 unnecessary deaths in the United States. I mean, it would have hurt our economy, and that was all he cared about, frankly, because he thought that was the key to his reelection. But it would have saved a lot of lives.
Right.
And I think that's what they need to be pounding on.
Right. Didn't the Republican Party campaign against a deadly pandemic? Didn't they tell the American people? I mean, if you had that clip of Bob Woodward talking to Donald Trump on the phone, I'd appreciate it if you could play that. But that was a good example.
Yeah.
If that was a really good example of the president lying to the American people, saying, but admitting on a phone call with Bob Woodward that the virus was 10 times more deadlier than the flu.
Yeah,
that
he didn't say 10 times. He just said far deadlier. Yeah, or far more serious or whatever.
I'm pretty sure he said 10 times deadlier.
Yeah. Well, I don't recall that, but anyways, in any case, the point, your point is well taken. And Trump, Trump didn't just lie to the American people. Jared Kushner thought that having, that blaming the pandemic on blue state governors and pointing out to Americans that it was mostly black people dying was a smart political strategy. And I mean,
unbelievable.
It really is, and it really needs to be publicized more widely. I'm with you, Al. Al, thank you for the call. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, yesterday you were talking about how Nebraska's unicameral was voting on whether to allow the congressional. We have 3 congressional districts that each get their own separate vote, Omaha is one of them.
For the Electoral College, right?
Yeah, and Omaha quite often votes blue.
Yep.
And so what they were trying to vote on and decide was, do we want to allow these Democrats? Hush. Do we want to allow that, or shall we just roll everything? Whoever takes the state, they roll right over Omaha and everything else, and it all votes Republican.
I was surprised that was defeated.
Republican.
Yeah.
It was sort of 36-8, but it's tabled. It has 6 more days before they say, okay, it's a dead deal.
So they can bring it back.
And then the session ends.
Right.
So somebody can still bring it up. And the problem is, here's how Nebraska Republicans run Nebraska. Pete Ricketts was governor for 2 terms. He got termed out. He was quite wealthy. He managed to afford to pay for his own run for governor. And then he decides to invest very heavily in Jim Pillen, another Republican, to be governor. Pillen wins the governorship in November 22. January 8th of 2023, suddenly Senator Ben Sasse decides to resign and become president of a college in Florida. Bingo, he's gone. Disappears, never to be heard from again. January 12th, new Governor Jim Pillen appoints old Governor Pete Ricketts to be the interim senator because Pete Ricketts was termed out, but he's not termed out as senator.
Yep.
So now he's also won another election on May 14th of this year to be the senator for 6 more solid years. Right. So you have one guy shaking another guy's hand. They're all Republicans. And, hey, got enough money? We can do this. We can keep everybody Republican.
Keep it all in the family.
Like it.
Yeah,
keep it all in the family.
Amazing.
And that's what they've done.
Amazing.
So when 36 people said no, we kind of think Omaha and these other districts ought to have a say. Mm-hmm. There's people there that don't vote Republican. That should be okay.
You would think.
And
although it's,
so we'll see. We have 6 days.
Yeah, what Nebraska has done, if other red states did that, it would eliminate the need to do away with the Electoral College. But no other red state is going to do that. And I'm disappointed to hear that there's 6 more days that they might bring this back up. We'll have to keep an eye on it. Sandra, thank you. Thanks for the information. Sure. I truly appreciate the report from Nebraska. Thank you. Stephen in Covington, Georgia. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Another caller already mentioned the 2004 presidential election, so I won't repeat that. But I don't think you can claim definitively that if the national popular vote had been in effect in 2000, I don't think you can definitively claim that Al Gore would have won that election because the entire electoral strategy of both candidates would have been vastly different. I mean, in the 2016 election, it was for Hillary Clinton. there was all this talk about the blue wall. Well, that was states. It has never been a campaign to win the most votes. It's been a campaign to win the most states in order to get the Electoral College. So
your point is well taken, Stephen, and here's how it would play out. Right now, neither campaign is spending much effort at all in the major red and blue states, like California, Texas, New York, Florida. These are huge states with large populations that could really swing an election, and yet no campaign is spending any money in those states because it's a foregone conclusion how they're going to vote. If the Electoral College is done away with, you're going to see national campaigning, and you're going to see much higher levels of turnout in both, all red and all blue states. And in that regard, the blue states have a whole lot more people than the red states. The Democratic senators, for example, represent 186 million Americans. Republican senators only represent 143 million Americans. So if the efforts are spread across the country evenly, you're going to see a higher proportion of Democratic turnout, frankly. And I think that the margins would be even bigger, by which Al Gore would have beat George W. Bush and Donald Trump would have lost to Hillary Clinton.
I don't necessarily believe that's the case because in just the last election, a majority of voters voted for Republicans in the House of Representatives. It was an outright majority. And I'll finish with this. You talk about a majority of voters voting. Hillary Clinton did not get a majority. Al Gore did not get a majority. Bill Clinton did not get a majority twice. His first election in 1992, he only won 43% of the vote.
Well, that's because it's almost impossible to get a majority when you've got a substantial third-party candidate or even an insubstantial one. I mean, Jill Stein got more votes than the margin between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016 in 3 or 4 of those swing states. If Jill Stein not been on the ballot, just like had what's his name, Ralph Nader not been on the ballot in Florida, Al Gore would have easily walked away with Florida. So yeah, again,
I don't think you can claim to be supporting voter, elections, direct voter elections, while saying that third-party candidates shouldn't run. I mean, I belong to the chopped liver of political parties. Yeah. I'm a libertarian, and I know that in 2016
the bottom line is that we need to have democracy in this country. The person that wins the majority of the votes should be the person who becomes president, and it hasn't been for a while.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
47 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Stay tuned. Hang on just a second. Okay, that's not telling me what I need to know. Let's pick up your calls. It's 47 minutes past the hour. And Deborah in Chicago. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Today is sadly, and it fills me with great sentiment, Dr. King's assassination.
You're right. It's the anniversary. Thank you for pointing that out. I should have mentioned that at the top of the show.
It's a dreary day here. Tom, I'm not one, and I think I've learned this from you. No one ever really told me, even though there have been moments, the ADHD, through you, I think, and no one ever told me, and I haven't yet gotten your book, but a number of things could explain. But that's very dear to me about Dr. King, and I think you have heard me, and I think you remember. I thank you for your efforts and genuine efforts, because there are those who have given lip service, and thank God, and may he rest in peace. The Eagle, the Black Eagle.
Yeah, Joe Madison.
Joe, I never really knew him. I heard him on a couple of occasions, but that his effort, and I'm sure he was genuinely true too, that I'm praying that for your books and your desire to have a democracy, Tom, I'm losing hope in democracy from Chicago. There hasn't been any for myself and young children here, as in the closing of the schools. But again, back to what I'm saying is the democracy. Please would you look into, see if you can get the president, because I've been calling, I even called this morning about getting declassified. Isn't there, can't he executive order, can't, even with Obama being a constitutional lawyer, can't they do something? And maybe that will help his black vote, because, Tom, you don't realize what's happening. Dr. King, justice delayed is justice denied. Dexter went to his grave not knowing who killed his father.
I see. You want them to declassify the FBI records around who assassinated Martin Luther King.
And even for you to do a further investigation, and with black people in Chicago, because if Mr. Abraham Bolden had been not a detainee, a political detainee, the crime that's happening now, it probably would have been snuffed out.
Yeah, I get it.
There's
Deborah,
so much behind that. Thank
Deborah,
you. But
you're
please
welcome.
Consider that.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much for the call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, another little session on court reform with regard to Judge Aileen Cannon. One of the things that Congress could do in as a matter of court reform is there could be a whole section on automatic recusals, requirements for automatic recusal. And if you look at this case, Judge Cannon is not allowing this case to come to trial. And to have the president has the power to appoint federal judges, but to appoint a judge in the district where he lives, yes, still has the power to do that. But when if that president or former president comes to trial, that has to be an automatic recusal. And Congress could make the law that way.
You would think. That makes perfect sense, Paul, as you often do. Thank you very much. 9 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. $53 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I remember this old commercial saying you can learn a lot from a dummy. Not to say that Donald Trump is a dummy, but I see him as the destruction that we recognize when you crash a dummy into, put him inside a car and crash.
Yeah, those were the old seatbelt ads, weren't they, Tyrone?
Yeah, and it tell you the damage that it does to a person's body. Mm-hmm. This is what this president is doing to our democracy. He's showing us how devastating how weak this country can be towards someone that want to wreak havoc. Yeah. And if we don't learn from what he's doing and how to push back, because we were supposed to learn with Nixon, we were supposed to learn with Reagan, we were supposed to learn with Bush. We are supposed to learn how to fix the problems that we have in our laws and our Constitution and what have you. Right. He's playing this little the Constitution don't actually say something exactly the way it's supposed to say. So guess what? It's a loophole. I can use it as a loophole because it don't tell me that the president is not supposed to kill anybody.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it don't actually say that. So I should be able to do it. So it's just we need to learn as a country how to stand up against these bullies. That's what they are, because only a bully would do something to somebody that they feel they can actually get away with no retribution, no backlash. So I'm going to do it because I can.
Yeah, and that's Trump's motto.
This is what the Trump is doing. Yeah. So if this country don't realize that these people, they're out here. This is what they do. You know, it's not a thing that I'm doing it because I don't like you personally. I'm doing it because I can do it, and you allow me to do it.
Yeah.
So
it's how Trump has gotten away with basically, robbing people blind his whole entire life. Lying to people and committing fraud and things like that. Yeah. No, excellent points, Tyrone.
That's what he does.
Excellent points. I got to move along, but thank you. That was brilliant. Martin in Philadelphia. Hey, Martin, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good.
So I've been listening to a lot of these pundits on the Russia-Ukraine situation, and there's a narrative going around that Putin wants to expand the Soviet Union. And I'm just trying to rack my brain. Why aren't these NATO nations and European countries putting troops in Ukraine? If this is the case, they should be terrified. But it seems like that's not the case. I'm just trying to figure out, is that really true, or is that just propaganda scare tactics to the public?
Putin has said that he wants to restore Greater Russia. I mean, this was the last major speech he gave on Ukraine. It was an hour-and-a-half long speech, and he rambled on and on and on about how Ukraine isn't a real country. Many of these countries in Europe are not real countries. They're just all, they used to be part of Russia. Russia needs to restore its empire, blah-de-blah-de-blah. He just laid it right out, that he's going to take this land. The reason that these other countries are not putting troops on the ground, but they are sending in weapons and they are sending money, is because when you put troops on the ground, you're in a state of war officially. When you supply weapons, you are not officially in a state of war. You're simply, it's simply international trade, as it were. And none of those countries wants to be the first to say, okay, we're at war with Europe, or we're at war with Russia here in Europe. I think the last thing anybody should want is another. I mean, this is World War I was in Europe, World War II was in Europe. I mean, how many more wars in Europe are we going to have? So that's why they're holding back, Martin. But they're very, very concerned. And thank you for the call. They're very, very concerned that Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine, because he said he's not going to stop at Ukraine. His generals have said he's not going to stop at Ukraine. His number 2 guy, Medvedev, just 2 weeks ago said that they're not going to stop at Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, on the other side of this break, Phil Ittner, live from Ukraine, is going to fill us in on what's going on there right now. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the chief executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th president of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent in Kyiv. I've got to stop saying the word old here, don't I, Phil? In Kyiv, Ukraine. You can find his video blog over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner. Ittner Philip is his Twitter handle. And Phil, welcome back to the program. I see that another Russian armored group was destroyed by Ukrainians.
Yeah, they've been trying to do an offensive movement down kind of past a town called Liman. This is kind of the western Donbass. And we also have to keep in mind, this is actually a rather large frontline area. But they have been trying a couple of different armor-led offensives, and they've been, touch wood, so far they have been halted by the Ukrainian defending forces. So there's talk that they may have overextended themselves, that they have just kind of run out of steam after
taking the Ukrainians or the
Russians? The Russians, after taking the town of Avdiivka, to try and push further into Donbass in particular, but towards a town, a major Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, which seems to be ultimately Russia's next major objective. I would argue that it's fantastical thinking that they could even consider trying to take a town like Kharkiv, which is a very large city and is deeply entrenched and defended. But that seems to be the direction they're headed in. But again, having spent so much of their manpower and exerted so much effort to try and take, to ultimately take Avdiivka, the Ukrainian town Avdiivka, it does seem pushing forward past that has been running up against Ukrainian defenses that the Russians can't overcome.
Remarkable stuff. What is the status of the war at this moment, or was that basically a status report you just shared?
I mean, more or less, we're in a very odd place because there's still, the hope that weapons will be coming, and there's some anecdotal. And again, I stress, Tom, this is anecdotal, but I am hearing little communications coming from the front lines that mysteriously boxes with ammunition are being delivered. One way or the other, that ammo is not, I don't want to say suddenly, but I'm talking to people who go up to the front lines and deliver humanitarian aid, and they do medical supply runs, and they do things like that. So they go and they actually make contact with the Ukrainian fighters that are on the front line, and they are being told that something is happening, that there is some easing of the heretofore roadblock that has been existed on the front lines. Now, there's some talk amongst those who kind of follow these things very closely here in Kiev that there may be a covert operation going on in Poland because people are looking at flight patterns. This is now open source information, and they're seeing an awful lot of large cargo planes arriving in kind of border regions along with Ukraine, and and putting that together with this kind of what appears to be an easing of the roadblock of the bottleneck in getting ammunition to the front lines for the Ukrainians seems to be easing. Now, again, completely anecdotal, and there's still very strong desire here for in particular to see the United States get its act together and pass that $60 billion aid package.
Yeah.
But something's happening on the front lines that I wouldn't want to get overly excited about it. But there does seem to be some sort of subtle covert shift happening.
That's a good thing. I know a number of
Yes.
European countries have upped their promises.
Yeah, and that might be it. It might be the Europeans. It may not be the Americans. The Czechs, have gone out of their way to try and find other sources of artillery, in particular ammunition, by going beyond the European Union or going beyond NATO. Where you have these arms agreements and trade agreements for arms and ammunition. The Czechs kind of were able to maneuver so that they could go to outside sources. So it's possible that that's what these soldiers that are talking to the NGOs, and again, not only is it anecdotal, but it is kind of 2 or 3 people removed because the soldiers are telling the NGOs are telling me.
Right.
So, we don't know exactly where the sourcing is. But if it is to be believed that these soldiers are saying, something's going on because we're getting all of a sudden, for long months we had nothing, and we had to really be very cautious about where and when we fired. We are suddenly now getting these crates of, in particular, 155 millimeter artillery rounds.
Right, I get it.
It's war. There's a lot of shadows.
I understand President Zelensky has lowered the draft age down to 25. I had assumed that if they were running a draft, it would be all the way down to 18 like it is here in the United States. What's the story behind this, and what's the significance of this?
This is a fascinating story, Tom, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's been brought up to me beforehand, and people really are mystified by this because there has been this has been a volunteer army. There is conscription. There is, there are police
they prevented
and
men
militia
from leaving the country, didn't they?
They have prevented men from leaving the country, and they also do go around and they do check. Are your papers in order? Have you registered for conscription if you are called upon? That sort of thing. But they have left this generation, which we normally in the West, we think the first thing that we go and look at a conscription or a draft, or we look at our young men because they're the most physically able. They're the ones who traditionally the military draws from for a variety of reasons. But here in Ukraine, it's slightly different. One, there's a generation older that really has beef against Moscow and Russia and really lived under the Soviet era. So they have this attitude of, wanting to defend against Moscow's resumption of its occupation here, its colonization of Ukraine. But secondly, Tom, think about what was happening when these kids, these 20 to 30-year-olds, it's basically said the limit is now 25 to 27 is kind of where they're looking at conscripting soldiers. But, normally you think even younger than that. But what happened in Ukraine in the fall of the Soviet Union 20, 30 years ago is that there was no stability here. So the birth rate dropped significantly. So that generation, which normally a Western power would look at to draw for its military conscription, they're a comparatively small generation. There are not a lot of them. And not only that, they're the ones that are going to have to build the country afterwards. So there's been a reluctance within Ukraine to do what most powers do, and that's draw the youngest. And it's because of this dynamic. It's because of the demographics within the country. That's changing, obviously, because now it is very much a all hands on deck kind of thing. There's a lot of talk about needing to counter Russia's major conscription efforts that are going on. I mean, Vladimir Putin said another 150,000 people could be conscripted in Russia. So Ukraine is desperate to get more people on the front lines. They're making the age difference change, but it is fascinating to see how it's something that we in the West, well, of course you're going to draw the youngest first. Well, here in Ukraine, the attitude is like, no, let the older generation, and when I say older, I mean I'm talking 30s, 40s, even 50s, obviously, and even older. There are reports of even older, but that's the exception. Is that that's the generation that has gone out to the conscription offices, gone to the mobilization centers, put their John Hancock down on the line and said, I will fight the Russians, because not only are they defending this generation that will hopefully rebuild Ukraine and build a brighter future, but also, again, they remember what it was like to be occupied by Moscow, and they don't want their children and they don't want their contemporaries to suffer again under Moscow's rule. So it has been an older fighting force, which is interesting to see, because that's not what we in the West think of when we tend to think of soldiers who are kind of drawn to the front lines.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Phil Ittner, check out his video blog over on YouTube, Philip Ittner. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Always good talking to you and getting an update live from Ukraine itself. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. Alabama Republicans want to criminalize librarians.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Just for doing their jobs, and a geeky science. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back. Dwayne in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Dwayne, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello, Professor Hartman. I just wanted to push back on the conversation you had with Congressman Pocan yesterday. Mm-hmm. And you guys were talking about, I think he said methanol, and it's actually ethanol. But my point is you asked him, it wasn't dirty because of the combines you have to use to cut down the corn and the trucks you have to take it to market. And he said, well, it's actually is better for pollution. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, well, that's not really right. It does burn cleaner, for sure, but to get the alcohol, you have to ferment the corn.
Right.
And the fermentation puts in the atmosphere a whole lot of CO2. So it's actually worse than petroleum, if you can believe that, for CO2
I've read,
emissions.
over the years, I've read a number of articles that suggest that, basically for 1 gallon of ethanol, you've got to burn a couple of gallons of fossil fuel. And that, that it's a bad deal. It's basically a subsidy to the farmers in the Midwest, and it was done purely for political purposes, largely because Iowa is a primary state.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I had one other thing. You know how Trump is going through this apparent dementia right now? Do you think this could be anything like long COVID from when he had COVID?
I'm not sure, and I'm not convinced that he's experiencing anything out of the ordinary. He's still quite lucid, quite in command of his faculties.
Sometimes.
Clearly he's lost a step here and there. He mixes things up, but he's 77 years old too. That happens in your 70s. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that he has gone from the realm of normal, mental challenges that accumulate with aging into the realm of dementia or Alzheimer's or mental illness. Well, I think he's mentally ill, but a broken brain, something like that. I don't think so. Dwayne, that's just my take on it. I realize there's people saying that. I think his pathology, his psychopathology, is more critical. The fact that he's a psychopath, and just severely mentally ill, a narcissist. Dwayne, thanks for the call. Dave in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Just like to say a word about free speech. I'm wondering why no one has yet mentioned the 1919 decision in the Shinnick v. United States. This was the Socialist Workers' Party that had been jailed for speaking out against the war and urging.
This is World War I.
young men not to accept the draft.
Right.
And it was a unanimous decision. And Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote that famous sentence that's often paraphrased: the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic.
Right. Which is what Trump is doing. Is that the argument you're making?
Well, the whole case is about free speech, and we're now seeing Mr. Trump come out and say that his speech is protected free speech when we have a Supreme Court decision that would set a precedent on that that's not even being mentioned.
Right. Well, the question is Trump yelling fire in a crowded theater? I think he is. Obviously, you think he is, Dave. So far, no court has thought he is, and no prosecutor has. We'll see. We'll see. Dave, thanks for the call. Your point is well taken. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. That's right, I'm done this one. Welcome back. The Alabama Library Association and others are calling out Republicans in that state. House Bill 385, introduced day before yesterday by State Representative Arnold Mooney and 30 other Republican legislators, would basically provide, well, this is a quote from the legislation, this bill would provide that these criminal obscenity laws do apply to public colleges, public school libraries, and their employees or agents. And then it expands the definition of obscenity in Alabama. HB 35 would add the following language to the definition of sexual content, quote, any sexual or gender-oriented material that knowingly exposes minors to persons who are dressed in sexually revealing, exaggerated, or provocative clothing or costumes. Basically, this is, you know, I assume that they're talking about like drag queen story hour, or are stripping or engaged in lewd or lascivious dancing presentations or activities in K through 12 public schools, public libraries, and other public places where minors are expected and are known to be present without parental consent. And basically, Matthew Lane, the president of the Alabama Library Association, called out the Republican chair in Alabama, John Wall, and said that, you know, he's willing to jail librarians for having books he considers unacceptable. He said this bill is government overreach. It robs parents of their rights and would have a chilling effect on free speech by potentially incarcerating librarians simply because particular books are available, including even the Bible. Keep in mind, there is rape in the Bible, there is incest in the Bible, there is genocide in the Bible, there's murder in the Bible, there is abortion in the Bible, there is people praying that God cause abortions in the Bible and God fulfilling their wish. There's mass murders by God in the Bible. There's it's just all kinds of wild stuff. So, time to ban Bibles? I think Republicans are going to get us there. And finally, for this hour, a Geeky Science. This is absolutely fascinating. This is a brand new study. This was published in the journal Clinical Diabetes. People with type 1 diabetes, this is the real original diabetes. This is where you get typically a viral infection that damages the Isle of Langerhans, this part of the pancreas that produces insulin. And so the pancreas loses its ability to produce insulin, and you have to take injections of insulin for the rest of your life. So the question that they sought to answer was, is it possible to ease the lives of these type 1 diabetics, to reduce the level of insulin that they need? Because the more insulin you have to take when you're a type 1 diabetic, the higher your risks of heart disease and other conditions. This is just remarkable. It was a 12-week study. It was the first randomized clinical trial that compared a vegan diet, a diet with no animal products at all, no dairy products, no eggs, no cheese, no meat, no fish, nothing, right? Just fruits, vegetables, grains, and nuts and seeds. That's it.
They compared a vegan diet with a portion-controlled but normal diet, a normal American diet, where it was a reduced calorie intake because they wanted people to lose a little weight, or at least those people who needed it. But, so it was a kind of like the diet that dietitians typically recommend. Here's a reasonable diet, a balanced diet, right? They split them in these two groups. They did this for 12 weeks. Those in the low-fat vegan diet group reduced the amount of insulin they needed to take by 28% and increased insulin sensitivity by 127%. Body weight decreased by about 11 pounds on average in the vegan group. This is just over a 3-month period, compared with a non-significant change in body weight in the portion-controlled group. In the vegan group, total cholesterol decreased by 32 milligrams per deciliter, compared with 10 milligrams per deciliter in the portion-controlled group. LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, decreased by 16 milligrams per deciliter in the vegan group and did not change significantly in the portion-controlled group that was still eating meat and dairy products. In this study, the reduction in insulin use on the vegan diet corresponds to a 9% reduction in cardiovascular risk. The decrease in A1C corresponds to a 12% reduced risk of heart attack and cardiovascular disease, respectively. And the reduction in LDL cholesterol corresponds to an approximate 20% reduced risk for a major cardiac event, including heart attack and stroke. So bottom line, I mean, yes, this study was done with diabetics, but what they found, I would think would apply to everybody. This is, for lunch yesterday, Louise made just a couple of great meals. We had a chili, a homemade chili with a couple of different kinds of beans and lentils and corn, frozen corn in it. It was just delicious, vegan. And then for dinner, she made a big salad and steamed a huge head of broccoli. And it was so good, and I was so full, and I felt great all day. It was just, eating vegan is wonderful. I mean, the varieties of flavor and you feel light. You don't get this, oh, I shouldn't have eaten all that. You just don't get that. And, reduce your risk of heart attack and stroke by 20%. I'll take it. I'll take it. So, that's our Geeky Science for the day. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. What's on your mind? We'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the meat and processed food and fast food industries would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with you.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. So what's in your mind today? Tom in New York City. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm so glad to talk to you.
Thank you. What's up?
I want you to know I'm a regular viewer, and I donate to FSTV, and I'm calling to give you and your viewers something of a warning. Beginning about a year ago, I started getting emails from an organization called Florida Dems, DEMS, asking for money. I've searched all their emails. There's no place on their email with that little word unsubscribe. So I cannot get rid of them.
You can put them in a spam folder, can't you?
Yeah, I can do that, except there's no way to stop them. My point of view is they are at best unscrupulous, at worst a scam. And I advise you and your viewers not to give them money.
Okay. I have no idea if these guys are legitimate or not, but I always encourage people to check things out. If it links to actblue.com, if the donation links to actblue.com, they're probably legitimate. But, I just don't know. Tom, thanks for the call. Hopefully Tom is not a planted caller trying to simply discourage people from sending money to Florida Democrats. David I'll take him at his word for the moment. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. I don't know if you've been watching The Regime, which I consider to be an alternate history of Ukraine.
I have not.
Okay. But the same streaming service, I'm surprised there hasn't been a protest by conservatives. These are all the real-life Superman and Batman, because a lot of related cartoons were yanked off that same service. But the ugly part is, I was 30 during the Bush v. Gore. I was one of the Nader voters. And so it's ugly that the 30-somethings today, probably don't remember back then. And so I hope they're watching movies such as the Recount movie with Kevin Spacey or the straight documentary 537. Unfortunately, it's hard to find the movie Left of the Dial with famous faces like Al Franken and Rachel Maddow trying to clean up the mess after the fact. That you and I can talk about Bush v. Gore and Nader 2000 like it just happened yesterday, but so many people have forgotten from old age or we're too young to remember. So we have to watch out for that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And that's Bobby Kennedy's mission this time around. It appears anyway. David, thank you for the call. Tom in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I've got good news for you. Joe Biden is transformational as a president. Best I've seen in my lifetime. Just yesterday, it's getting very little attention, but he and his administration and some Deb Haaland just protected 250,000 acres in the Continental Divide, called the Thompson Divide. Now, this, for our grandchildren, I don't want to get emotional, but I am. As a grandfather, knowing that this land is protected so my grandkids can walk along a stream, or if they can see a moose or an elk, clean air, clean water, everything. And Deb Haaland said, hey, this administration is dedicated to protecting these kind of areas. This is getting absolutely no press, but it's called the Thompson Divide.
It's like every day the Biden administration is doing something cool, and almost every day it gets, none of it gets covered. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, you can look it up, Thompson Divide. I mean, and another one, and I talked to you about before, is food is medicine. If you're hungry, we're going to get you food. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
And since you have wonderful producers, if you call up HHS or the Department of Ag, they'll give you someone to talk about this program. Save people from hunger.
Yeah.
Protect our lands. The man is good.
Yeah.
And I don't give a flying fig about his age.
Yeah, me too. Me too. As long as he stays alive, I'm good with him. I'm with you. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Let's talk about the 5,000-pound gorilla in the room. Yes, we all die. We all get old. But Joe Biden is going to be working as long as he can until he dies, or maybe he's incapacitated. But as of now, he's fabulous. He's doing a great job. Thompson Divide, look it up. It'll make you cry.
I'll do that. Tom, thank you very much. Spot on. Pastor John in Guilford, Connecticut. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey there, my brother. They also, for that brother who just got finished calling, President Biden passed the American Climate Corps for young people. for climate change. I'm calling because we need to remember and vote. Now, I know you know what happened 56 years ago at 7:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I don't know if our viewers know, your listeners know that, viewers. So that's when Dr. King was transitioned. We need to. I'm working right now by calling up senators and Congress people to have posthumously given the Presidential Medal of Freedom of people who died for our right to vote. I'll give you one example. William L. Moore, a white man who was killed on April 23rd, 1963. He's the reason why John Lewis had the Bloody Sunday March. He marched by himself. He was killed. You have the white lady, Miss Viola Luzio, Michigan, who was killed after Dr. King's speech from March 25th, 1965. You've got Reverend James Reed, another white person. And then you have a person in Florida, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Moore, killed on Christmas Day, the 25th wedding anniversary. NAACP leaders killed for registering blacks to vote. So I'm going to encourage your listeners, if I may, to call your senators and call the president, ask them to possibly give these people the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and to wake up our young people to realize that people died so you could have the right to vote.
Oh, yeah. And there was Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, too. Only one of those three was black. I don't recall which one. I think it was...
Yeah, I think they're two Jewish. They're both Jewish, right? No, Schwerner's Jewish, right? And so that's another one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting point, John. Good one. Thank you very much. Walter in Northridge, California. Hey, Walter, what's up?
Well, just hoping, to thank everybody who's involved with the program, yourself and all the listeners, the staff for sure. You were looking the other day for appropriate public structures to name after Donald Trump.
Instead of Dulles Airport, yes.
and nobody suggested either a trash dump or garbage heap. I think those would be appropriate. And also to remember that all restrooms are to eliminate and flush. So if we could change the names to Trump's Eliminate and Flush Station, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
And I'm glad to hear the chuckle. I thank you very, very much for all the service. It is most wonderful. I finally have the money to contribute, alas, not in the 3 for 1 day.
To Free Speech TV, it's a great network, and we're really proud and glad that, to be on that network, and so glad that they carry us. Walter, I got to move along, but thank you for your comments and your kind words. Say that again?
We're honored to hear. We're honored to hear all the information. God bless you all.
Thank you. I'll take all the blessings we can get. Thank you, Walter. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Tell Connor O'Rourke I said hi. Okay. Now, a few minutes ago, you were talking about dietary intake vis-a-vis insulin, veganism. I remember when I first heard vegetarianism, thought that was weird, and then veganism showed up. Now, of course, last 6 years, I've grown up as an omnivore. I hear what you're saying. It's difficult to make that transition, if not outright impossible, but I'm aware you're supposed to have 5 servings of vegetables a day and fruit, produce overall. I'm up to 3, man. Give me some credit.
Yeah. It shouldn't be work. I mean, there's so many great every ethnic food is largely vegetarian-based. I mean, they may have a lot of meat in American restaurants, but Thai food is mostly vegetarian-based. Indian food is it's almost entirely vegetarian-based and easily made vegan.
What about Mediterranean? We hear that's supposed to be the best diet.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of salads, couscous and grains and things like that. A lot of fruit. Yes, they eat fish and they eat feta cheese, but,
About a week ago, you were talking about some of the supplements you had, which I was very excited about, being an old guy. Relatively old. And so, but what particularly drew my attention was the apple cider vinegar component, because, of course, okay, maybe I got a couple of pounds on me, but I hear there's other things that it can do, and I wonder how serious we should take apple cider vinegar and how you, Professor Hartmann, take your apple cider vinegar.
Okay. Well, I take a capsule of the stuff with the mother, which is the the bacteria or whatever it is. I guess it's a fungi actually that makes it every day with all my pills. And then one of the things that I notice is when my father was diabetic by the time he was in his 60s. And in fact, we did one of those, genetic tests, and I have the gene for type 2 diabetes. And I'd noticed that I was starting to get, if I ate if I ate dinner that was really high in starch, like a thick crust pizza or something like that, I'd get leg cramps later on in the evening. What I discovered was all I had to do was take some apple cider vinegar, and they just went away.
Now, you're saying it's about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's about sugar metabolism. That starch metabolizes into sugar, and then my body just doesn't deal with sugar like it used to. So I'll also, if I eat a meal that's got a lot of starch in it, and by and large, I'm trying to avoid them now. But if I eat one, then I'll take some apple cider vinegar pills too.
You're saying apple cider vinegar pills, and I suppose this is probably something available on Amazon or in your drugstore.
Yeah, there's a dozen different manufacturers, and they're in every drugstore, and they really work well. I mean, it's just remarkable stuff.
I think that answers my question, and I hear the orchestra playing me off. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, good talking to you, Chaz. Thanks for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Stay with us. Sue in Dayton, Ohio. Hey, Sue, what's up?
I had a question for you. I was listening to you yesterday, and I thought you said that Netanyahu had funded Hamas.
Yeah.
And so I just looked it up. Is that true?
Yeah, it is.
It is true. Okay. Could you just talk about that a little bit for a minute?
Yeah, Israel has been giving money to both Hamas and the what is it called? The Palestinian Authority, I believe, the governing group in the West Bank, for years. And in fact, some of that money we give to them to give to those people. But Netanyahu had the game that Netanyahu was playing, and this is no secret, by the way. I mean, you can read about this in the New York Times, the Washington Post. The game that he was playing for years and years was trying to play these two groups, the Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank, and these are on opposite sides of the country, right? Gaza is like, California. If Israel was America, Gaza would be California, and the West Bank would be, the New England. So what he was trying to do was play them off against each other, get them hating each other, get them competing with each other, and so he was supporting Hamas in a big way, right up until October 7th. And apparently, they thought that Hamas was using that money to run schools and hospitals and public infrastructure. And in fact, what they were doing was diverting a significant portion of it to build this network of hundreds of miles, or at least 100 miles of tunnels underneath Gaza, and build a small army, in preparation for this October 7th attack. So, and that's not sitting well with a lot of Israelis. They want an investigation into this. They want to know what Netanyahu knew. The other big question is that Netanyahu was warned that this attack from Hamas was coming by Russia and several other intelligence services, but Russia went public about it 2 weeks before it happened. And not only did Netanyahu not do anything, just like George Bush didn't do anything when he was warned that bin Laden was going to attack America, Netanyahu apparently pulled back the military, or if he didn't pull them back, at least he didn't put them in place. I mean, you've got all these communities, these Jewish communities, Israeli communities, right around Gaza. And if you were warned that there's going to be an attack, you would think that you would at least move, some security into that area. So, the army, the police, whatever. But for 7 hours, Israel was under attack, and there was no response at all. I mean, these guys came in, they did their dirty deed, and they got out. And there's a lot of Israelis who are going, what the hell is with that? You know, why
Right.
didn't Netanyahu at least fortify our defenses? And so this is one of the reasons I think why Netanyahu is doing this over-the-top, slaughter campaign in Gaza, and now he's trying to starve people to death, because it distracts from his failures. It's so outrageous, it's so big, that it distracts from the fact that he essentially set this thing up. Obviously not intentionally, but it just looks really bad for him. And I think that, if now you've got Benny Gantz calling for early elections this fall, in this September. And if that happens, Netanyahu's going to be out on his butt. If he's out on his butt, I mean, he failed in his effort to rig the judiciary so they couldn't prosecute him. And, I think the guy's going to go to prison. Did I answer your question, Sue?
I hope. That answered my...
Okay,
yes, very
good.
much.
And as I said, you
so.
can, none of this stuff is theoretical. It's not Thom Hartmann's conspiracy theory. You can look it all up in mainstream media. Thank you, Sue, for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. It's 9 minutes before the hour, and Brad in Prattville, Alabama. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I heard you mention earlier in the program about SB 385 going through Alabama, which was proposed by the Alabama Taliban. I'm sorry, GOP. It was the GOP that did it. But anyways, y'all, and I'm sure y'all are seeing this in every state, and your viewers probably know about it. They are not just going after things that are sexually explicit. They are going after anything that even mentions the word gay, trans, queer, anything like that. They are going after those books, and they're so uneducated about this. Literally, one woman went in a few months back and just typed in the word gay and wound up finding an author whose name happened to be that, and got their book banned temporarily until people figured out, oh, there's nothing in there. It's just the person's name. But they're not stopping with just that. It is going to continue. And we've already seen challenges from books like The Hate U Give, which was challenged. I believe that was the one that was challenged due to it being disparaging of Southern ideals, which, of course, when we talk about Southern ideals, we know we're talking about genocide of the natives and slavery. So they want to completely rewrite the history. It's like it said in 1984, who controls the past controls the future, who controls the future, or you know what I'm saying.
Controls, yeah.
But they are trying so hard to only get their information out, and there are a lot of people that's on the ground here that are working hard to try to fight this, but we need a lot of the viewers that you have from Alabama to call into your senator and tell them that you are opposed to SB 385.
Call into your state
you do
senator.
not want the government. Yes, thank you, state senator, to make sure that this doesn't get passed. It just in the last few weeks, we've had, I believe, 6 people fired from the library. One was the director of the library. He was fired because he simply asked for clarification on what they mean by pronouns and things like this. Wow. So he was fired, and then there were 4 other employees that got fired, and then just recently, I believe sometime last week, we had another employee that got fired.
Is that in Prattville you're talking about?
That is here in Prattville.
So it's got to be happening all over the state. I mean,
Well, Trussville just had a big thing. I know down south, I think it was Daphne, Mobile area. They're going through it. They're going into pretty much any library that they can, but it's being pushed by national groups like Moms for Liberty, and they are now getting all of their people stacked up on our library board. So before too long, there's not going to be any opposition. They're just going to be able to do whatever they want to do. And we need everybody showing up at your city council, your county commission. We need to call our state senators, our state representatives, and let them know that we are opposed to the government telling parents how they can parent their children. There are books available for everybody, and there should be.
Yeah.
And we don't need the government, and that's a big thing here in Alabama. We hate big government telling us what to do unless it's telling a minority group what to do.
Yeah.
Then we love it. You know?
Yeah, including more women.
Get out there, but also quickly I want to mention the organization Read Freely Alabama. It was started here in Prattville, and it is growing by leaps and bounds, and they are doing so much great work in this area that I would love for them to have a little recognition. And if you're from Alabama, or even if you're not, go and check them out.
Read Freely Alabama. Do you know their website?
Yes. readfreelyalabama.org.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Brad, thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Tom.
And good luck with it. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, my friend?
Good. What's up?
Love your show every day. I want to make a correction yesterday. No, 2 days ago, when you were describing an island in the Caribbean that's associated with Donald Trump. I think Russian oligarch that gave him the money or helped give him the $175 million.
Yeah, the island was Dominica.
Right, but it's no. The natives, they pronounce it Dominica.
Dominica. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I didn't know that.
Yes. Anytime you go there, because I've been there before, you know, lovely island, beautiful people, beautiful sea, oceans, beautiful beaches, and, you know, great fishing as well. But the reason I'm calling today is because it's been on my mind, and you are the man that I wanted to share with. Basically, with your audience as well, I just feel like because I heard you brought up the electoral college today, and I believe, you know, I've been hearing for years now on Fox News, especially Hannity, railing against participation trophies. You know, how there should always be a clear winner. And, you know, we're bringing up the youth the wrong way because Americans always felt like, you know, you had to be the champion. There wasn't no need for a participation trophy. And to me, you know, these people are always blinded by their hate and their hypocrisy because the Electoral College is a participation trophy.
Yeah.
What Trump did on January 6th was also not wanting to relinquish, or just face a loss. And basically, that was
I get it. I get it. Charles, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but I get it. Your point is well taken. But thank you very much. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Is Judge Merchan going to throw Trump into jail now? I'll tell you about that. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the Ella train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Wow, this is amazing. Just 57 companies are linked to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States since 2016. The biggest, during this is a quote from the report, during this period, the biggest investor-owned contributor to emissions was ExxonMobil of the U.S., which was linked to 3.6 gigatons, billion tons of CO2 over 7 years, or 1.4% of the global total. Amazing stuff. Well, is Donald Trump going to go to jail? Inquiring minds want to know. Judge Merchan expanded his gag order. This is the election interference / pay off the porn stars trial that's going to happen, and it's a criminal trial. This is a you might go to jail trial, not a you may have to pay a fine trial, although there could be a fine as well, in New York City, that Alvin Bragg is bringing before Judge Merchan. Trump, of course, was attacking Judge Merchan's daughter, his 30-year-old adult daughter, for working for an organization that provides some services to Democrats, God forbid. And so Judge Merchan expanded his gag order, saying, you shall not attack any member of this court, with the exception of the prosecutor and the judge. He didn't name them himself or Bragg, or any of their family members. So yesterday afternoon, Donald Trump reposted a blog entry by MAGA diehard Laura Loomer, alleging that Juan Merchan's wife, Lauren Merchan, worked for the district attorney, the attorney general for the state of New York, Letitia James. The quote, what was published, the headline was, more of Judge Merchan's anti-Trump bias exposed as New York AG Letitia James employed Merchan's wife, and the Democrat Attorneys General Association paid Lauren Merchan's Authentic Campaigns company. So bingo, he's naming both the judge's wife and his daughter. And he did this yesterday. Now, after the gag order was expanded, he's begging to be thrown in jail. He's just begging for it. Now, my guess is that Judge Merchan is not going to issue a bench order. He's not going to sit there and say, okay, marshals, go find Donald Trump and drag him back here, and we're going to throw his butt in jail. It's not going to play out like that. The way it's going to play out is that when the trial starts in a week and a half, Donald Trump has to be there. On his civil trials, he didn't have to show up. Like the E. Jean Carroll case, the first one, he never even showed up. He just figured his lawyers would take care of it, and he ended up owing her $5 million. So when he appealed, he definitely showed up, and then he ended up owing her $83 million, right? But that was a civil trial. You don't have to show up for a civil trial. You can have your lawyers represent you, because there's no possibility that at the end of the trial, when the judge says you're guilty and you're going to jail, that you're going to get hauled off to jail. In a civil trial, there is no jail. But in a criminal trial, jail is the principal outcome, or the most common, or one of the more common outcomes.
And so you have to be there because, you know, you may get dragged off to jail at the end of the trial. And so Trump is going to have to show up. And if he behaves in this trial the way that he has behaved in some of his previous court cases, I think it's possible that Judge Merchan will say, Mr. Trump, get yourself under control, or say to his lawyers, you know, and if he persists, and he probably will, the judge will say, okay, off to the cage with you. You know, you get a day or a week or a month or whatever, up to, you know, contempt of court is up to a month in jail. In the clink. Laura Loomer is citing public records in this claim that Laura Merchan was employed by Letitia James from 2009 to 2022. I don't know if she was or not, but I don't think it makes any difference. You know, the judge is the judge, and Donald Trump committed the crime. He's trying to say, oh, you know, you need to just end the case altogether. And if that doesn't work, you need to recuse yourself. And I'm telling you, neither one of those two things is going to happen. Judge Merchan is not putting up with any more of this. I just, you know, he's over it. Speaking of Donald Trump and his legal troubles, I don't know if you caught this. It sort of made the news. It's not a big deal, frankly, but it's one of those interesting stories. You know, Donald Trump got this this California billionaire who does loans to people who are buying used cars, got him to put up the $175 million bond so that he could appeal his conviction for fraud in New York State, the Letitia James prosecution. And what's interesting is that if you look this bond posting up online, the New York State says that it was returned for correction, that they didn't file it right. The main thing that they failed to do was attach a financial statement. Now, a lot of people thought that that was a financial statement by Trump. Apparently what they're looking for is a financial statement from the bond provider. In other words, here's proof that we can actually follow through on this bond. So I find that interesting. You know, Knight Specialty Insurance Company, that they're sufficiently capitalized and that they're authorized to post the bond. So apparently they haven't done that. My guess is, though, that everything will be fine for Donald with regard to this. And although we still don't know what fee he paid or who co-signed or what properties he put up as collateral, if any. This guy is a major donor to Donald Trump as well. And so, you know, we just don't know. But I'm guessing that this is a paperwork snafu more than anything else, and they're going to fix it. Finally, we got an ADHD alert today, a Hunter in a Farmer's World alert. Our website, of course, hunterinAfarmersworld.com. And it's about a story, it's put a notepad by your bed for ideas. This is something I learned when I first took transcendental meditation instruction back when I was 16 or 17 years old. And that was that if I sat down to meditate, sometimes things that I had completely forgotten to think about but were really important would pop into my mind. Things that I needed to do, things that I should do, ideas for businesses, ideas for, you know, whatever. It's just stuff pops into your mind all the time. And sometimes it was just such good stuff or such important stuff that instead of meditating, I'd be sitting there thinking, how can I remember this? And you know, and just trying to reinforce them. And that's no way to meditate. And so I started keeping a pad and a pen next to my meditation cushion, you know, where I sat, and I would just make notes, and that way I could let go of what I was thinking. Well, a couple of people with ADHD told me that the same deal when you're trying to get to sleep, that or you know, sleeping throughout the night, and you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, and their comment was, you know, write it down and you go back to sleep. And I recalled that I had done something like that myself. So anyway, it's a nice little kind of tips for living piece that you can read, you know, for free over at hunterinAfarmersworld.com today. So that's what's going on with that. All right, let's pick up your calls here. Brandon in San Jose. Hey, Brandon, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Okay, so this whole issue of the whether Merchan is going to throw the book at Trump and put him in jail.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is going to happen, and I think you know why.
Because Trump
they're afraid
wants
of reprisals.
Well, I think they're afraid of reprisals. I think they're also afraid that it's going to make Trump a sympathetic figure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to make him look like a martyr, basically.
At least for his base. I'm not sure that it's going to have that impact on the rest of America. I think that if Trump misbehaves in a way that any other person misbehaving would have gotten them locked up, and he gets locked up, that, yes, his base is going to freak out. But everybody else, I think, is going to go, he shouldn't have done that.
Right. How is it feasible anywhere? They're going to put him in the tombs with Secret Service? I don't see how this works.
Yeah, you just, you put him in a jail cell and you put a chair outside and you set your Secret Service agent in the chair. It's not rocket science.
They could work it out, I'm sure. But
yeah. I doubt they're going to throw him into general population. I mean,
No.
Although he would probably organize them into a Nazi march,
Oh, God.
I mean,
Anyway,
he's got them
thanks.
singing songs. So
That's an interesting notion.
There you go. Brandon, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 15 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day as we continue on the program. Stay with us. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where smart people get their news. I'll be right back with your calls. What's on your mind today, right after this? And welcome back. Rose in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Rose, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You are my sanity drug of choice.
Well, thank you.
What I'd like to know is very much on the subject that the previous caller was talking about. I believe that Trump's behavior is purposely trying to get himself put in jail because he believes that that will trigger the violence of his moron followers. And I wanted to know what you think of that.
I think he may well believe that. I doubt that it'll happen. I think his time has passed. I think he's now being seen by most Americans or many Americans as a rather pathetic figure. But you will recall there was that moment in, it was Judge Engeron's court. This was in the fraud trial where Judge Engeron said, I have the ability to lock you up essentially, but I'm not going to do it because I know that's what you want. And Trump said, yes, that's what I want. So, yeah.
Didn't remember that. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, whether Merchan is going to do it, but I mean, you can't just let people get away with this kind of stuff.
I know. It's absolutely insane.
There has to be consequences.
Thank goodness. And we rely on you, as I said, to keep us sane.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll do our best. And I appreciate your kind words, Rose. Thank you for the call. Dennis in Springfield, Massachusetts. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I have to ask you about the Jack Smith trial there. Jack Smith is such a brilliant attorney. Did you think he saw that he was going to be in front of a Trump-appointed, obviously, judge who was somewhat compromised? And couldn't he have tried to have her recuse from it right at the beginning? I mean, there's so much information about her, and obviously some of her judgments have been pro-Trump. I mean, isn't there a lot of evidence there to prove that?
Apparently not enough. I mean, it's a really big deal to remove a judge from a case. It's basically a statement that you don't trust that judge or you don't think that they're competent. And courts, appeals courts, which is where that removal would have to take place, are very reluctant to basically diss lower courts in that way. So, what Jack Smith has to do, and he couldn't have done it right off the bat, because you can only remove a judge for cause. And that cause has to be almost at the level of, impeachment, essentially. So he's got a tough one here. He's got a real tough one. And you know, he is threatening to go to the appeals court and have her removed from the case. The problem is that in 6 months, she has not made a single ruling. And you can only appeal a ruling. She keeps, you know, suggesting things and asking questions like, hey, do you want to come up with, you know, jury instructions and things like that. I think these are all delay tactics, frankly, and that she's not doing a ruling because she doesn't want to be taken off the case because she wants to continue to be Donald Trump's firewall, essentially. And, you know, how this is going to play out, I just don't know.
Everybody seems to think on attorneys that every ruling or every type of thing she does is counter to anything that's legal almost.
Yeah, not legal isn't quite the right word, but certainly appropriate or traditional or the way things are normally done. Yes, absolutely. She is very much outside the mainstream in that regard. Dennis, thank you for the call. 20 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. Actually, it's kind of, I guess it's supposed to rain this afternoon here. David in Clearwater, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, it wasn't on my mind before you mentioned it, but we are having beautiful weather down here.
Oh, good. That's one of the advantages of living in Florida.
But it's, you know, it's terribly cold. It's 71, I think.
Oh, my.
All right. I heard you make a statement to a lady who had asked about Israel paying monies to Hamas. And in the time you were telling her that indeed they had, and it was probably for humanitarian purposes and was misused, you mentioned George Bush, and in the same sentence as Netanyahu, and with reference to what had happened, the tragedy that befell America. And you said that neither one of them would do it on purpose. I disagree with you.
Okay. Build your case.
With the plan for the 21st century that was developed, that plan had to be
Project for a New American Century, it was called, yeah.
Yeah, as serious as Pearl Harbor.
Yes, they said that a second Pearl Harbor would be necessary to justify the invasion of Iraq. You're absolutely right. And Jeb Bush signed off on that. George wasn't a signatory, but his brother was.
No, not on the plan. He was the president at the time we went to Iraq.
Right.
And at the time it happened.
Right.
So
this was in '98. The Project for a New American Century rolled out and said that.
Yeah, I just believe these people are evil enough to do that. Okay.
You know, I'm not. Lacking the proof, I'm reluctant to accuse either Bush or Netanyahu of intentionally allowing their countries to be attacked. But I think that, you know, you're welcome to go there, David, as a talk show host who would like to retain his credibility, you know, with the majority population. I can't go there, but I understand how somebody would think that. I completely understand how somebody would think that. And I would argue that even lacking not going there because we lack the proof, that still many people are looking at this thinking that ignoring the warnings, which is what Bush and Netanyahu clearly did, and I can emphatically state that, ignoring the warning is just as bad, or maybe not quite just as bad, but it's pretty terrible all by itself, isn't it?
I agree.
Yeah. So I that's why I think that it's gonna haunt him politically.
I think they knew about it and didn't do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, you may be right, David, but I can't officially go there. I get it, but I get it.
I've got some precedent. That I can cite the attack on the Capitol because there was fraud in an election where there was no fraud.
I missed your. Why are you saying that? What's the connection?
You double over to what Trump did rather than turn over our.
Oh, yeah, what Trump did was very much on purpose. I mean, that was an act of commission, not an act of omission. I mean, arguably the worst that Bush and Netanyahu did was omission. They ignored something. Trump actually incited something. Yeah, excellent point. David, thank you for the call. Excuse me, Rick in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Yeah, hey, I think the judge ought to throw him in jail, and I think Biden ought to call him out on anytime, anywhere.
Yeah,
and that's where to have the.
What do you think would be the result, the consequence of Judge Merchan throwing Trump in jail for a couple of days?
Well, I think the thing is, hey, he ain't above the law, and he's got to protect the people that he's running his mouth on. I mean, and
no, what? Like I get that, but what do you think? Do you think that there would be a violent response, or do you think Americans are going to shrug their shoulders and go, "Geez, I guess the guy's a crook"?
Well, I think they'll just sit back and kind of be kind of shocked, but I think they would be kind of anxious if that's when Biden decided anywhere, anytime, I'll debate you in your jail cell.
Yeah. I mean, you got, former president of France is in prison or is going to prison. You got the former president of Greece has gone to prison. You got the former president of Peru has gone to prison. It's not like this doesn't happen. Two former presidents of South Korea have gone to prison. It's not like it doesn't happen in advanced democracies, in developed democracies. And frankly, there's a former German chancellor who I think should be in prison, but for taking $1 million from the Russians. But Rick, I got to move along. But thank you for the call. I suspect that the fear of a blowback from Trump being imprisoned is wildly overblown, and that Republicans are doing everything they can to stoke that fear. But I could be wrong. What say you?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the rest of us. I'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely. But our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history. And we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log on to my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com.
34 minutes past the hour. Breaking news. President Biden was supposed to talk on the telephone today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That meeting has finished, and the White House has released not a readout of the conversation, but a summary in which, well, the New York Times summarized it best. President Biden told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel on Thursday that strikes on aid workers are unacceptable, and he appeared to threaten to condition future support for Israel and how it addresses American concerns about civilian casualties and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the White House said. During a lengthy and evidently tense call with Mr. Netanyahu, I'm reading from the New York Times here, Mr. Biden expressed his frustration over the killing of 7 aid workers by Israeli military forces and what he sees as the broader disregard for the suffering of innocents in Gaza, even as he expressed support for Israel's right to respond to Hamas for the October 7 terrorist attack. So, you know, is this the first step toward saying, okay, that's it, you know, no more bombs, no more money? I don't know. Biden seems very, very reluctant to take that step. And, you know, I on the one hand, I get that. You know, Israel's an ally, and you don't just cut off your allies. On the other hand, this behavior has been over the top. It is reprehensible. It is genocidal. It is destructive of not just, you know, the lives of the people in Gaza. It's destructive of the reputation and future of Israel, frankly. So, anyhow, just so you're up to date on what's going on in the world here. Picking up your calls, Francis in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Francis, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've just read about a week or so ago, it was in the Wall Street Journal, where the Federal Reserve Bank lost $114 billion trying to pump up the economy. And I think it's time that we did away with the Federal Reserve and simply think of it as a pipeline, and at the end of it is a big pot where all the gold collects. I think that pot should be the United States Treasury under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury, who is appointed by an elected official. And that way, all of that interest paid on everything from your credit card to a mortgage, car loan, what have you, will go in to pay for the running of this country, and I think that's the way it should be. Now, these guys lost all that money, and I guarantee you, not a single one of them lost their job. And, Tom, I respect your opinion on this, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
Sure. The Fed doesn't make or lose money. The Fed manufactures money out of thin air. It can retire money, or it can expand the money supply if it desires. There was a time when I held the same position you did, Francis, that we should just replace the Fed with the Treasury Department. Then I spoke with a Treasury Department official who said, you don't realize how political the Treasury Department gets. The Treasury, you know, the Secretary of the Treasury is an appointed position. Yeah. And you do not want, you know, if you get a crazy president like Trump, you would not want Steven Mnuchin to have control over the U.S. money supply as well as, you know, the U.S. currency.
Well, I knew you were going to say that. I was thinking about that myself, and then I thought, well, certainly the people will speak up, and then all of a sudden I came back to January 6th and all the rest of this mayhem. Maybe the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know.
I think with regard to the Fed, that's true. I would like to see more transparency out of the Fed, although I think they've been doing a relatively good job. You know, and I know that there are some real Fed critics. I mean, you know, Larry, who's really up on economics and calls into the program every week, you know, he is very, very opposed to the Fed. I'm a little more sanguine about the whole situation. I don't think that the Fed is, although I think Larry's point that, you know, every time there's a Democrat in office, the Fed increases interest rates, and every time a Republican comes into office, the Fed decreases interest rates, and that's been the case since I believe LBJ or Nixon or whatever. Larry could tell us, and he probably will call in and clarify. Yeah. So, you know, I think you could argue that the Fed has been kind of politically corrupted, but not as anywhere near as badly as the Treasury Department would be vulnerable to.
Let me ask you this, and maybe Larry will chime in on it. But I went to Professor Google for what that's worth, and I couldn't find a definite answer as to whether or not the I guess the Office of Management and Budget had ever audited these people I mean, crying out Christmas. DOD gets audited every now and then, and
not effectively. The DOD is missing several $1 trillion and has never had an actual, thorough audit that where the books balanced. I mean, they just never have. The Fed was audited a couple of years ago. They were audited in 2019 or 2020, something like that, and that was a joint effort between Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul, who pushed that through the Fed audit.
Well, there you go. If Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul can get together and do something, then maybe there is hope for the country after all.
There you go, Francis. Francis, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Oscar in Bend, Oregon. Hey, Oscar, what's up?
Hey, Tom, it's a privilege and an honor. This is a long overdue phone call. I've been wanting to reach out and speak with you directly, so this is quite a feat. I'm a transplanted chippy from Southern California. I'm actually in Redmond, Oregon, which is right next to Bend in Central Oregon, and we just got some snow this morning again. So here we go. But I wanted to check you on a couple of things. A couple of weeks ago, when Biden came out in his State of the Union address, you talked about his use of the word illegal kind of flippantly and minimizing, because it hurt a lot of us more, I guess, Chicano progressive types who, see that kind of, hear that kind of word. And the more you hear it, the more it becomes, like not a big deal. But obviously, words like that demonize, the least amongst us. And once they get demonized, they get treated as second-class citizens and worse, as you see what's going on at the border right now. And now this morning, someone had brought up the fact that I think on CNBC, they were referring to Obama as how we used to refer to him, again, as strong Chicano progressives, and comparing him to Bush's immigration policy as the deporter-in-chief. Mm-hmm. And you, again, kind of said something to the effect, well, he was just following the law.
Well, the dynamic is actually more complex than that, Oscar.
And for those of us that felt a little uneasy about, the word illegal, you just kind of basically told the rest of us to get over it.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Oscar, if I can just jump in and say something, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry.
The law called for the deportation of people who were here, who didn't go through the process of applying for asylum, who were here illegally.
Sure.
The law calls for that. The problem that Obama had is that whenever a Democrat gets into office, and this has been going on since basically the Clinton administration, whenever a Democrat comes into office, Republicans start yelling and screaming that suddenly the border is wide open. When a Republican comes into office, Republicans stop talking like that. And what happens is this border is wide open rhetoric, and I recently wrote an op-ed about this in which I documented over 100 different Republicans who have made that statement. And these get into the news media in Guatemala and Honduras and Venezuela, and people believe them. When Ted Cruz says the border's wide open, people believe that. And so what happens is whenever a Democrat comes into office and the Republicans start promoting this propaganda, boom, you have an explosion of people at the border. You see 2, 3, 4 times increases, just in the first year of a Democratic presidency over what you had in a Republican presidency. And it's because Republicans are essentially inviting people into this country. So Obama had a much larger load of people who were deemed to have broken the law, who had violated the law by not applying for citizenship, or by not applying for asylum or for immigration status of any sort. And so he deported more people. And yes, they called him the deporter-in-chief. But that was what was so. With regard to the use of the word illegal, yeah, I try not to do it. I don't always succeed. It's far more appropriate to call people undocumented or words like that, on the one hand. On the other hand, you're not going to stop the Republicans from using that term, or frankly, much of our news media.
Of course.
So, I may slip up.
That doesn't give license for us to use it, or anyone else.
No, I get it.
Maybe for political purposes, but to label folks as such. One other couple real quick things. I would prefer that you avoid using the word Hispanic, That's a Ronald Reagan term that he used to kind of label all of us back in the 80s. It's a word that emanates from Spain, and we reject anything that's connected to Spain.
So what do you want to be called?
One book
Latino?
for you to put on your book list there would be Rodolfo Acuña's Occupied America.
Okay.
That was transformative back in the late 70s when it's in its 45th printing.
Thank you, Oscar. I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
We're coming up on 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. And welcome back. Just informed that No Labels has decided not to run a presidential campaign this year. Apparently, they thought that they didn't need to screw Joe Biden by having a third-party candidate because Bobby Kennedy's going to do it. Maybe that's their math. I don't know. Mike in Santa Cruz, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I actually would like to share a couple of quotes with you and then offer an observation. The first quote is from Noam Chomsky from a few years ago. Noam wrote, "Republicans have ceased to be a political party. They are now a radical insurgency." I think that's probably a little bit more accurate now than even when he said it.
Yeah, I agree.
The second is from quite a while longer ago, about 90 years ago. Will Rogers said, "I'm a member of no organized political party. I'm a Democrat."
Right.
I think my observation is that if Democrats don't have a reason, they don't get excited about something, they stay home on election day. Unfortunately, I don't see Joe Biden as whipping up too much excitement.
I'm pretty excited. He's done more to stop climate change than anybody in history. We've got a better economy than we've had since the 1960s. We've got the best Hispanic and black unemployment numbers in the history of the United States.
Well, I know you keep talking about Bidenomics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's working.
Unfortunately, the average voter isn't that concerned about how much the gross national product is.
I'm not sure that
going up.
any of that's true, Mike. I hear these Republican talking points all the time. But the fact of the matter is that you've got all these media outlets, from Breitbart to Fox News to 1,500 right-wing radio stations to half the newspapers in America that are constantly ranting about how bad the economy is and inflation is destroying us and quack, quack, quack. And people are listening to that. But the actual reality is that the economy is doing just fine. Thank you very much. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Mm-hmm. There's something that hasn't been talked about very much on the Bragg case, and that's he's going for a Class E felony for the crime on 34 counts, and if he's proven guilty, it's between 1 and 4 years for each count. Now, that's for the bookkeeping fraud charge.
Right.
I'm just curious did he commit a crime when he did that college?
No, that was a civil lawsuit, the Trump University.
Okay, so he hasn't committed a crime yet.
Arguably.
So they say it's not, the charge does not carry a mandatory prison sentence.
Correct.
Because he hasn't been convicted of a crime yet.
In the past, yes.
In the past, but it's still saying that it's possible he could be charged.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got 30 counts of, in 5 years each. That's a lot of years in prison. I frankly doubt he's going to serve any time in prison, but hey, Martha Stewart was 6 months in prison. And, so what's good for the goose should be good for the gander. Excuse me, John, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. Are you feeling exhausted by Donald Trump? So many Americans are. And not Donald Trump, not just Donald Trump. The entire GOP. We've got this war on trans people. We've got a war on queer people. We've got a war on people of color. A war on voting, young people concerned about climate change, and Republicans not only refusing to do anything about it, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene out there talking about how, oh, well, it's just normal variation, you know, it's nothing to worry about, just keep on shoveling that coal. People cutting pills in half because they can't afford their medicine. Parents who don't have enough money to properly dress their kids for school, even though they're working full-time, seniors fearing that the Republican Party is going to finally succeed in killing off Social Security and Medicare. They're trying it again. You know, it's this whole, yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling as part of cut Social Security. It's nuts. I got a whole op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 10 minutes before the hour, and picking up your calls here. Ed in Flint, Michigan. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Ed, this is Ed. Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, Ed. What's up?
Okay, I got a premonition in my head that just won't go away. I honestly believe that we're going to have a terror attack shortly before the election. It's going to be carried out by either ISIS or Hamas. The terrorists are already here. Trump let them in during his administration. They are holed up in convenience stores all across the nation. Not all of them. Some of these guys.
Ed, I think I'm being punked here. So hold up in convenience stores was probably the clue. So I'm just going to note that. Terry in Ventura, California. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Mostly I called to share headlines in this morning's LA Times. Okay, Tom?
Mm-hmm.
If I heard you correctly, you said the person who put up the money for Trump's bond is unknown, not according to this morning's LA Times.
No, the person is known. What Trump put up is unknown. You know, what kind of collateral he put up or if anybody co-signed.
Oh.
We know who did the loan. We just don't know what he got, you know, that incentivized
Don
him to do
Hankey, right?
Yeah.
Don Hankey. When I saw his business model, my response was birds of a feather, okay?
Yeah, there you go.
The kind of business model he would be attracted to Trump, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you explained that. I appreciate it, Tom.
Okay, good talking to you, Terry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Mark in San Francisco. Hey, Mark. What's up?
Hey, Tom, you know, I think the Democrats really need to go hard on Trump being the reason why the borders are open and we don't have a policy for immigration. Go hard on that. And also, if you really wanted to make a point, start sending the migrants to Mar-a-Lago. See what happens then.
There you go. That would, it would take I mean, I suppose Gavin Newsom could do that, but, you know, I think that there's just kind of a moral cringe factor to exploiting human beings for political purposes that you're not going to, you know, Republicans are perfectly willing to do that. I don't think Democrats are. Joe in Houston, Texas. Hey, Joe. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Well, first on the immigration, you said that the migrants are coming because Republicans say the border is open, but if it wasn't, they wouldn't be able to get in. And second, the numbers don't really reflect that. There were, I don't have them off the top of my hand. I'm driving. I can't look them up. But there were way many more border crossings under Biden than there was under Trump.
My point.
So,
because Republicans invited people to come up here.
They didn't come because of an invitation and none not let in.
They sure did. The Coyotes are reprinting news stories in which people like Ted Cruz are saying the border's wide open. You know the border's not wide open. Yes, people can get through it, but it's not wide open.
Doesn't Joe Biden say that he welcomes everybody? So wouldn't that do the same?
No, Joe Biden never said he welcomes everybody.
Oh, okay. I think I'll look that up and call you back and play it for you.
Yeah, good luck, Joe. Kendall in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Hey, Kendall, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, why don't we just make it official? And I think this would get 70% of the American people. Just make it official. Just declare America a global citizen zone and do away with the concept of citizenship. The Chamber of Commerce crowds in the Republican Party would be all for it, and a whole lot of people on the left would be all for it. I think it'd be about 70% of the American people. I don't think a majority of Americans care whether you call us a citizen or not. You could just declare us a global citizen zone. And as far as Biden saying
that's just weird, Ken.
He was all for immigration, it was in the Democrat debates.
Okay, yeah. Well, being all for immigration is a very different thing than saying anybody can come into our country. Marcia in San Francisco. Hey, Marcia, what's on your mind today? Marcia?
Hi. Hi, Tom.
What's up?
Yeah, so I wanted to make a comment in regards to the gentleman who called earlier and saying that Obama was the porter-in-chief. I'm an immigration attorney in San Francisco, and a lot of those numbers were skewed because it takes years to get a hearing, and much of that was overspill from the Bush years, who they were very aggressive. The other aspect of that is Obama did things for people in removal that no other president has done. He created a policy of prosecutorial discretion, which allowed families to stay together. My firm won more cases, as well as my colleagues under Obama, than any other president before. So, yes, there were more people in deportation, but there were a lot more grants, and there was a lot more humanitarian considerations of keeping families together and just dropping and dismissing cases, a policy that Biden has carried through to today. So, and remember, he gave us DACA, which is deferred action, which when you're in removal, you get deferred action. You were pulled out of removal in order to pursue that. There were so many. He could only do so much because Congress was inactive on this and just completely fell asleep at the wheel. You know, it's a political football. But he did what he could. And he tried to give us DAPA, which would have been deferred action for parents of American citizens, so that the parents who have children could work and get driver's license and be able to take care of their families. And that was shot down by Republicans forum shopping for a judge who would shoot down DAPA. So I think it's a misnomer to say that, and I want a lot of people to understand what good he has done, the policies he's created that have been very humane and kept a lot of families together that otherwise would not have happened.
Thank you, Marcia, for setting the record straight. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. That's great. Brilliant. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Double check your voter registration, too. Make sure everybody you know is registered to vote. Another 6-8 months, we're going to be getting them out to the polls. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say,